Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Valley of Words Fireside Chat with Manjul Bajaj, who is the author of the one of the most celebrated books this year, In Search of Heer. And I want to thank Valley of Words to who have so kindly invited us and adjusted their schedules for our recording. Manjul, it's lovely to be talking to you. Thank you for making time. So, In Search of Heer is a retelling of a legend which has been retold in a very symphonic, profoundly intoxicating prose by Manjul. I think she's a natural storyteller, and the quintessential timelessness of Heer Ranjha's love story becomes a transformative read in this rendition called In Search of Heer. So, Manjul, I really want to know how is it that you manage to weave such a rich, intense tapestry populated with unforgettable characters? Each of them has a distinct personality, each of them is very well etched out. And it's not just the characters, you've woven them into the overall narrative that conjures up the village landscape so beautifully because of its imagery. So it's like in today's parlance, if I say, it's a very wholesome book, you know. What all went into getting there?
Okay, let me sort of describe my writing process. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but I write for myself. So when I set out to write a book, it's mostly to answer questions which are important to me and to visit places, to delve into things which draw me, which call to me. So it's a way of spending 2 or 3 years of your life in a way that works to sort of engage you and make you creative and make you sort of on a journey that means something to you. So the questions that I started with were really of patriarchy and the relationship between men and women and this elusive search for love. You know, because there are very few successful love stories. The really important love stories all end in tragedy, and the others just end up in dusting and cooking and mundane everyday things. So one was the search for love. The other was the search for the kind of men and women that we want, or that we can feel good about or reach out towards as people. The other thing was simply that Punjabi literature inspires me a lot. Like, I grew up in Lucknow, my parents were from West Punjab, but I grew up in Lucknow in a very Lucknowi tradition. And I only came to Punjabi very late in life, and it's not my, it's a language I sort of worked hard to understand and to immerse myself in, and it's not as if it's my natural heritage, but it is some part. So this story was part of the tales that you heard from your parents or your older aunts and uncles, and Varisha's music was somewhere in the background. So one was just a reaching out for all those places one had heard of, which my parents lost when they were sort of in their late teens. They would have moved during partition. So one was the search for a lost homeland, and the other was just to answer this question that what is love and why do the relationships between men and women get so messed up, which they invariably do. So.
Absolutely. So that actually gets me to my next question, which was going to be that it seems that you're exploring the many meanings of what love means to not just you, but to people. So for me, I was reading the book, I felt there was this sense of longing. There was also a sense of escape and freedom, also faith. So the way each character symbolized love in Search of Heer, except for, of course, that nasty uncle. Each of them spoke differently. So, how would you encapsulate? I'm not asking you to define love because I think that's a very, um, I don't think it can be defined because it means so many different things. What did you want to encapsulate as
Let me see. See, one thing was romantic love, right? It's people are very sort of they don't look it squarely in the eye. If you look at our society, either you're dismissive of romantic love, you think of it as bachon ka khel, or it should be over by the time you're 23 or 24, or you look at it with a great deal of repression and disapproval and sort of cups and killing and honor killing. So, why is our relationship with love so messed up? Because at the deepest level, every human being is looking for love. Man, woman, other queers, everybody. Like the greatest desire is to be in this relationship which will make you sing and write poetry and feel absolutely precious and wonderful. And if you look back at anybody's life, their fondest memories are of the days of being in love. And love sort of is like a benediction. It's a blessing. It sort of bursts out through you with a lot of creativity. So why is it then that society is so suspicious of love, or why we want to kill our children for reaching out for it, or why love is full of so many transgressions? Like everything is a transgression unless you marry in your caste and your community and at the right age. And, it's like a very narrowly defined thing. And feelings don't obey those boundaries. So that was it. So the many aspects of love, I look at Malki's love for Heer because it's the mother's way of protecting her child. Even Kedo's sort of depravity is looking for something. I mean, it making him behave terribly and in a double sort of way. But he's also pulled to it. And the other thing I focus on is sexual intimacy, which is sort of because to me, romantic love doesn't exist without sexual attraction. So why leave that out of the equation? So my book does look at, it looks at distortions of intimacy, like in Kedo's case, in the villain's case, and it looks at the natural reaching out for each other's body in Heer and Ranja's case, which is like which is where romantic love begins. It's not, you can't talk about romantic love and pretend that it has nothing to do with sexual attraction or desire. And we don't really understand desire. So it's a topic worth delving into, according to me.
Oh, well, that's a very intense way of looking at it, and in its different nuances. But which gets me to Heer, because for me she the centrifugal force of the narrative, because she's feisty, and frankly, even if you've drawn her from the past, to me she was a symbol of what today's women need to be: have the same spirit, have the same feistiness, have the same knowledge of herself and what she wants. She knows her mind. But and I don't want to use the regular jargon which strong women are associated with. But were you attempting to also send this kind of thought out when you drew Heer as a character?
The point I was trying to make through my characters was really that every man and every woman are the same through the generations. We tend to sort of quote ourselves with some sort of glamour and glory and brave, as if we've discovered thinking, and we've discovered feminism, and we've discovered sex, and every generation thinks that they've arrived somewhere, and that their parents' generation or their grandparents' generation or the 16th century people were different. I don't think so. I think whatever we are evolves from those women. So Heer was every bit as brave as someone from today would be. We tend to color the past in a sort of feebleness which doesn't exist. There have always been brave women. And I make this point by making Heer idolize Razia Sultan. So you might think that here is something sort of we are looking up as a brave woman creating, but she also had a role model, and it will go down right to Eve or wherever the first woman did. Um, so there's nothing. There's nothing special about our bravery. We draw upon everyone who's gone before us. So the social setting may be different, but the human responses come from the same place. I don't know if that makes sense, but if I've explained
No,
it properly.
No, but because human nature.
We are also somebody's history, 20 years, 30 years, a century later, they're going to say, oh, those historical feeble women, and we are at the cutting edge, but it's not really like that.
Yeah, I feel I'm history already. So, yeah. Yeah, you've really summed that up really well. Which also we spoke about this last evening when we were talking about Ranja, and you were rather surprised because I said I liked Ranja's character because he was affable. We could identify with him because he was very real. He had the strength to stand by his convictions. He had the strength of thought and belief that this is what he wanted to do with his life. Um, uh, and then you have, on the other hand, you drew Kaido Langra. You really made us hate him because he meant to be hated. And I despised him thoroughly, you know. And Heer's parents, like the father, her mother, her best friend, they all stood out. Um, how do you live with so many voices in your head? Would I want to start with Ranja first? Because as a man, I don't like men too much. So the male character really, you must have done something in the narrative for me to identify with his thoughts and also to understand him.
Okay, so Ranjha is where the story started. He's one of the main narrators in a way that he gets to narrate more than once. Mostly everybody else comes only once to narrate the story. But Ranjha is where I started the story with. And as far as the characters are concerned, I'm closest to Ranja, like his thoughts, what he was questioning, was where mind tends to go about what is the development path we're taking, what are the choices we're making, why are we sort of so we're giving so much dominance to the economic system over our choices. Why are we not playing the flute? Why are we not reaching out for love? So Rancha is sort of me at one level, but it's also my dream man in the sense because you can't talk of equality between men and women. You can't talk about shining women unless you have men who are willing to have a sense of humor and to step back and to create the space. So Raja is that man. Raja is the man who's not threatened by a woman, who's not sort of so puffed up and full of his ego, though he has a very good self-opinion, but he's not threatened by him. So that's really where I see this whole thing moving. If you want women who are able to live their lives fully, then you have to have men who are willing to receive, to sort of leave space to create a different relationship. So that's really where Raja is coming from. And Keto, of course, represents all the duplicity and the hypocrisy and the sort of depravity and the corruption of patriarchy. That he pretends to be one thing and is actually another thing. And I've got a bit of flack for continuing to portray him as a langra or a disabled person because it reflects badly on disabled people. But that was the story I was carrying forward. It was from the tradition Kedoza Langra. So there is an incompleteness about him. And there is a sort of and that's really patriarchy. It doesn't have a leg to stand on, so the cruelty has to be enhanced. You have to be cruel to survive as a patriarch. You have to, be out of touch with half the members of your family and their needs.
Yes, no, I think you've really captured the essence of what those stood for. I mean, obviously you sketched the character, but for us to understand that, and also it was very frustrating to read those parts in which he appeared. Like I remember speeding up my reading every time he came. Because you're still living that as a part of your life today as a woman. You're still living with that one-legged patriarchy.
These were difficult parts. These were difficult parts to write, and I considered leaving them out because they sort of trigger off a lot of things for some readers. It's sort of rape and molestation and all of that. But then I said that you have to be honest. You have to explore it in every dimension. You can't leave out the uncomfortable bits. Otherwise, what are you adding to the story? What are you bringing to the story if you're not incorporating these dark threads?
Yes, yes, because I think even with exploring romantic love, intimacy, and what other nuances of love there were in the narrative, the ugly side, the real side, the conflicting side, the darker emotions of human nature. That's what I was saying yesterday also, that you've really managed to balance both so beautifully. And I'm using the word beautifully because it's actually a beautifully told tale. It just it was refreshingly a very good change for me to read when I was reading the book. Coming back to uh, the narrative, you've employed a lot of enduring literary devices, which, I mean, I'm making it sound technical, but then you have the crow's voice. And for once, I actually love the crow. Otherwise, you look at a crow outside and you're like, you don't want to look at one. And you've got the crow, you have the goat, who was just adorable. And then you have the pigeons also. So they all stood for something in the narrative. They pulled the story forward. They joined the loose threads together. But what made you do this? What made you employ a crow and a goat and so on and so forth to kind of weave the carpet together?
I don't want to get too theoretical, but basically, this is sort of an eco-feminist critique of modern society at one level, in search of Heer is that. But the same forces that cause us to oppress women or to oppress lesser men in the hierarchy, like Saida Khera, are the forces that lead us to exploit nature, to treat the intelligence of other species as something they can dismiss. So this is a sort of a mirror on society. I was turning the gaze of the crow or the pigeon or the goats back onto us. But see, these are the choices you're making. And these are the ways in which you are stupid. You may be ruling the world, but it is not as if the other creatures don't bring anything to the table. They have their own intelligences, which if they were telling the story, would be the grand brain or the grand. So it's really. It also is a big questioning of man's relationship with nature and the destruction of nature. And the animals work also because it's a folk narrative, and in folk tales you have, like Panchantratra or Jata it is, we are as Indians used to animal characters in our stories and our folklore. So it worked for me in both ways. And really, the crow just landed up. I was looking for Heer's voice, and suddenly I saw a sort of voice 20 feet above my head telling me the story. And I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm a crow." So that's how it really began. It was very intuitive.
Right. I'm going to. This thought just came to me while I've been listening to you right now. Is that you are superbly conscious of the ecofeministic side of our global narrative, not just Indian. You are also talking about relationships. You obviously have searched the human nature and the complexity of human nature in your mind. You're an acute observer, so to say, not just of the social structure, but also of the larger structure around us, of how we have given back to the planet Earth and how we've made the wrong choices. Have you ever um, considered looking at writing a nonfiction on any of these areas?
Not really. So I spent my first career with development and environment. So I've sort of spent 15, 20 years in the field and doing consultancy reports for the FAO or the British Development Agency, or the agency I used to work with. So I've done a lot of non-fiction, um, technical writing in my first career. And fiction is really what fascinates me. I think of fiction as, I don't know whose quote it is, but the lies we tell to reach the truth. I feel I can do much more with fiction, though I know there's a huge fashion for narrative non-fiction. I don't see myself doing it. I'm a fiction writer.
That, of course, I mean, as I said, you seem to be a natural. Story just seem to flow so seamlessly. In fact,
I
it
think
seems
stories
so.
deeper. Sorry, Karen.
Sorry?
I said, carry on. I just interrupted. Like I said, stories just take us so much deeper than descriptions. Though I like writing essays. Once in a while, I would like to write an essay. But a whole book of narrative nonfiction, not my. Um, I'm
That's
already
very
looking
heartening.
forward to
Your new book?
to writing more fiction.
Well, that's great. I think more power to you, Manjul. And how would you, because you've got a book of short stories as well, uh, and I don't want to get into the technical aspect of the craft of short story writing because we all have major admiration for short story writers. Mm, But you've done both, right? So you're more at ease with the short story because you also mentioned that one of them is literally a novella. Or you more at ease just developing a full fiction? Because a lot of people
My
who do short
favorite.
stories, sorry, yes.
I was saying my favorite sort of format as a reader is actually the novella. And in the Indian tradition, we have a lot of novellas, like, this whole business of trilogies and big fat books, which sort of indulge the reader out of its mind, is not my thing. So if I would like to write more novellas, but I don't think that they work in the market these days. They're not, it's neither a fat book nor a thin book. So, um, but I'd like to write everything. I'd like to write more short stories. I'd like to write more novels. I've done children's fiction, fantasy. So I don't see myself stopping at one place. I'd like to do it all. I mean, I even write poetry. There isn't much to write home about, but I try and write in as many ways as I can.
Right. It's very rare to come across too many writers who are so comfortable in their skin with both a short story, the novella, and a full-fledged fiction. And just to put you at ease about the novella, publishers are quite okay with taking on novellas.
Okay.
So just keep it in mind. Yeah. But anything close to a 30,000 words is very, very doable.
Okay. No, that's good to
So
hear. It's sort of reassuring. I find it's very dense. It's not so small as to need this technique to hook the reader. And it's not so big that you've said everything you had to say and you're still carrying it on. So I like novellas. Maybe I'll attempt another.
well, it's been great chatting with you, Manjul. I think we've come to, but I'd really like to wish you all the best in all your writing endeavors and everything else, because you seem to straddle a lot of different worlds at the same time. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mita. It's been lovely being here, and thank you to the Value Words for inviting me. It's been a lovely session. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, it's my great pleasure to welcome Miss Manjul Bajaj, who's written the wonderful book In Search of Heer. We've got four fascinating questions for you today, Miss Bajaj, and I'm going to start with the first one to save time very quickly. Apart from Heer Ranjha's story, what other folk tales would you like to see retold from a female or a feminist perspective?
Okay. I say personally, this is the only tale I'm going to retell. I'm not a person who repeats herself, or I'm not sort of like a professional reteller of love stories. Or this was a story which drew me a lot for various reasons, and that's why I chose to retell it. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm sort of done with it. I mean, there's not going to be a Laila Majnu or a Soni Mehwal after this. So this was the story that fascinated me. These were the characters that fascinated me. And so this was the story I told. And as far as I'm concerned, there are no other plans on the anvil. But
I have an
yeah, all love.
I'm
Carry
now
on.
thinking of so many questions to ask you that aren't in this audience list. So we'll see how much time we have left. But what are your thoughts on Ranja? Is the second part of this question. How much did Ranja, you addressed this briefly, but how much did Ranja feature in your imagination as you were writing this?
Okay, Ranja to me was a key character. He was a very strong part of the reason I wrote this book. As much as Heer was to me fascinating, it was actually Ranja's character because, you know, we talk about empowering women, we talk about women reaching out for everything, and we don't talk about the kind of men you need to take you into the new world. It's assumed that women will be like men, but no one is talking about how men will be more like women, or how we will have a different interpretation of masculinity, which is less toxic, which is less assertive, which is more self-assured, so Ranja is all that for me. Ranja for me is the man who dares to be different and who dares to be independent of all the things that are required of men. Just as women are locked in prisons of gender identity, so are men. And we just assume that everything that goes with manliness is desirable. So we don't question masculinity that much. So Ranja is the man who questions masculinity and all its more toxic or more socially deleterious aspects. So Ranja to me was a very important character and one I really liked exploring.
Yes, and I think this is a very valid point that is actually so
Does that
obvious
answer
that
your question?
yes, absolutely. And I mean, I hope it satisfies our audience who asked this. But I think this is such an important point that you've brought up, which is that patriarchy and its damaging effects are equally pervasive on men and women. It is a question of coming together and recognizing the toxicity of it as a larger system rather than as impacting just one gender.
And
So,
also on the environment, if you look at it, on men, on women, and on the natural world, on other species, which is a point I make repeatedly through my other narrators, that, the system you've chosen harms everybody except the few dominant men, right?
yeah.
So,
Very true. Our third question for today is: how do you think the myth of Heer has affected popular perceptions of Punjabi women, if any?
uh, I really don't know. See, the Heer Ranjha story is told again and again through cinema as well, and that's where a lot of people get to know it. And I think each director, each version has been very different from the last version. So I don't know what actually um, filters down, but I feel the music is one thing which has united India in the sense that you look at all the references to Rancha and Heer in songs. And that strikes at a very sort of subconscious, subliminal level. Love is a passionate coming together, or love is longing. I see that as a very sort of important contribution of the Heer Ranjha tradition, the whole musical aspect. But as far as its wider influence over the rest of India, I'm not so sure because each movie, when you have Sri Devi playing here, and then you have Nutan playing here, and then you have, you have Priya Rajvansh playing here, and each here is sort of so different from the other that I don't know what actually comes across of here in popular culture in a pan-India sense. So.
Do you feel at all that any of those perceptions of Heer, any of those representations of Heer, factored into your perception of her and the way you viewed your Heer?
Not, I sort of drew for my hair mostly from Varisha's hair. I read the translation of Varisha's hair, and then I've picked up very important elements of her character. Like the first part of my book really draws upon Damodar Gulati's hair. That was the earlier version before Varisha's hair, the first written version, really. And I've drawn a lot from the performing traditions. There's the dialogue of Heer and Malki, there's the dialogue of Heer and the Qazi, which have been written by different writers. And that's where I from Bollywood cinema. So my Heer is just, she draws very strongly on past Heers, but not the Heers of cinema, more the Heer of Punjabi literature, the original literature. And I read a lot of versions. I read as much as I could put my hands on
Yes, it
before
really,
coming up with my Heer.
yes. And it does sort of resonate because your Heer is a very complex, interesting character who kind of stays with the reader for a long time after. So now, the final question from the audience, but then I have a question of my own to ask. The final question is: what is a modern Punjabi myth about women in particular that you find interesting?
Modern Punjabi myth about women.
Yes,
Ah,
quite a broad ranging question.
yeah, you lost me here.
Perhaps what they mean is a kind of stereotype about the modern Punjabi woman that you find
That she's
interesting.
loud, that
Yeah.
she's tasteless. I mean, I remember a friend in college, a South Indian friend. My mother had come for our convocation, and she told me with, uh, your mother doesn't look Punjabi at all. She's such a graceful lady. So, there is this is a Malayali
No.
friend. So there is this stereotype of the Punjabi woman being loud and garish and sort of always ready to do the gidda, and that grace belongs elsewhere. I don't think so.
But the Gidda is a very graceful dance. I find it to be a lovely.
Well, it's a very high energy, right? It's sort of, I
Yes.
mean, it doesn't, I mean, if you contrast it to Bharatnatyam, say, which is all mudra and,
Yes.
so,
I mean, the idea of
but,
control, I
but
think,
there
is
is the impression of the Punjabi woman as being too outspoken or too
yes.
graceless, maybe is the word. So,
Yes, too brazen, I suppose, in many ways. And this is also interesting, the idea of the woman
reason,
being
right?
loud. But I think we'll have to start wrapping up. So the final question that I have to you actually is that as an author, you said that this story is done. So what's the next story that's in your mind, and what's the next story that you think you'll be writing for all of us?
I'm working on a couple of books, and they're both very different, and I'm not sure which one I'll actually finish first. But one is a collection of short stories set in the Kumaon Hills,
Oh,
and these sort of cities and deal with the last Britishers left in the Kumaon area. And the other story I'm working on is a novel which is really inspired by the women of Buddha's family. Gautam, so it's in the time of Gautam Buddha, and it's centered around his mother and his sister and the other women who joined the order and were the first nuns. So it's inspired by the Therigatha, which is the song of the nuns in the Buddhist tradition. So those are the two very different things I'm working on, and at the moment I really don't know which one I'll take to finish first.
well, they both sound fascinating. And this Kumau Hills, I presume, I know that you've been in this area recently. So I suppose you got lots of
Yeah,
new material for your book.
yeah,
And
yeah. It draws a lot from my stay in Kumau. So
I can't wait for it. And I hope that you come back next year and we're able to discuss either one of the books, whichever one comes out by next year.
I'm a slow writer. I'd say another couple of years at least. I enjoy the process of writing so much that I draw it out. I tend to spend a lot of time writing because I know that's the best part of being a writer, is to sort of actually be doing the writing. So maybe the year after next. And it's been wonderful being here. Thank you for calling me.
Thank you so much for joining us twice. And I just want to say that it's honestly been such a pleasure to speak with you. And there's so much to unwrap from all of the work you've done, and I'm sure all the work that you will continue to do. So thank you very, very much for joining us today. And I hope you've had a nice experience with us.